Welcome everyone to this month's Intentional Success webinar. It's called Not All Projects Are Created Equal. We're going to talk about the keys to taking control of your business outcomes before they control you. And this is all about making money. We'd love to grow our business, but we really, if we're going to grow a business, we'd like to make more money while we're doing it. So that's what we want to talk about today, is how can we make some more money? Now, I am your host, as always, Tom Stimson. I'm president of the Stimson Group. I've been doing these webinars now for, 15 years. You can find out more about me at trstimson.com. Visit us on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, all the usual places. Love to hear from you. I want you to subscribe to my newsletter if you're not already part of that. But I know many of you are, because that's how you found out about the webinar. Now, this particular webinar, let's talk about the why. Now, why are we having this one today? And if you've looked at the webinars I've done over the past couple of months, it all kind of leads up to these things. There is a progression to what we're doing here. So the phenomenon that I've encountered, and I have to preface this by saying it's extremely gratifying how much more mature and relevant the business practices of our industry, our little community, has become over the past couple of decades. And the types of things that we're talking about are becoming more and more sophisticated, which is very exciting for me. It's a lot of fun to watch you guys grow and prosper and take on new business practices. One of the things that we repeatedly run up against in my consulting practice is an understanding of cost in the live event rental world. And the dealing with the concept of having a rental inventory, and how do you value it? How do you price it? How do you know if this job is profitable or not? And the mistake that some of us are making is that we are trying to target a gross profit percentage, but we have a combination of products and services that are built in our job cost that actually renders that gross profit percentage useless for what you're trying to use it for. Your gross profit percentage makes the assumption that all revenue has equal value. Therefore, you can always target the same gross profit percentage. And it's not true. I mean, I'll show you that the math is not that difficult, but getting our heads around this and finding out another way of looking at it is a little bit more challenging. And I'm going to take you through that. So you need to understand how every aspect of your business makes money, or you're going to end up losing money. This is the thing that I find unfortunately all too often. I'll find organizations that have 3 or 4, even 5 lines of business. Each line of business makes money in a different way with a different set of products and services, but management or ownership is looking at all revenue from all projects the same and expecting the same ROI, the same gross margin returns on all revenue. And if you challenge them on that, they go, no, we absolutely understand that when we're doing an installation or integration project, that those margins are less than if we're doing a live event project. But then when practice, when they go back and they look at their numbers and establish margins, they don't seem to be grasping all of that. So let's talk about it. Let's, and then 10 years from now, we'll be talking about something even more challenging than this. So there's a little history on this. In the rental business, and most everybody on this call has a rental aspect to their business, or is at least familiar with it, or remember the history of this. Back in the day, which when you're at my age, that means 30 years ago, if you bought a product for rental, the standard operating procedure was divide the price by 10. That became your rental rate, and you expected to rent it 10 times a year. Or at least 10 times a year, if not more. There was a time where we would actually get a 10-to-1 return annually on equipment. We could buy a graphics video projector for $10,000, rent it for $3,000 a week, and have it rented the first 10 or 12 weeks that we owned it, working nonstop. So by the end of the year, we'd probably used it 30 or 40 weeks even. Huge returns, and that's not what we see today. Today, what we see is more of a 1-1 return. If we can make back what we paid for it in the first year, we think we're doing pretty darn good. So that right there is a pretty big shift in the math of our industry. Back in the day, labor, we kind of threw it in. Yes, our labor, labor costs us was probably less than half of what it costs now, even less than that. Um, and the equipment that we used wasn't extremely labor intensive. So we tended to kind of throw labor in. If we get a good rental, if I'm getting 10 to 1 return on rental, yeah, I could eat a little labor or pass it through a cost. Today, what I see people doing is taking their cost and adding about 20%, which is a crisis in and of itself, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. Just because we're doing it doesn't mean it's good. Back in the day, delivery, you just delivered stuff. Don't hurt the rental deal. And you picked it up for free because it's your gear and that's how you're going to get it back. But again, we want to do the rental. Rental was everything. Today, I see people mashing their competitors. Unfortunately, some of your competitors could not do math if you held up 2 fingers. And the prices that they charge for delivery are ridiculously, unrealistically low. So matching your competitor when your competitor doesn't know what they're doing isn't necessarily brilliant. And using that as an excuse, well, my competitor is less, isn't necessarily thoughtful. So we'll address a little bit of that in today's webinar. And if we're selling products, and 30 years ago, 20 years ago, rental companies sold a lot of product. Matter of fact, it was more likely that you would buy product through a dealer who also had a rental business, and products we marked up 30 or 40%. And you didn't have a lot of choices about where you could get it. There was no Amazon, there was no wholesalers, distribution really didn't exist yet. There weren't big companies you could go that represented a lot of products. You had to go to a dealer. And dealers often had exclusivity within a region, or there was limited to the number of dealers. So markups were pretty good. Now today, yeah, box sales, yeah, you might get 20% on a good day, but on the average, yeah, you're looking at 10%, right? So things have changed quite a bit. So unfortunately, how we do job cost in projects has not evolved with this change in numbers. So our solution was creating this minimum gross profit percentage. So we say, okay, if our overhead is 20%, then all of my jobs need to make at least 40% so that we have 20% net profit. That kind of a math sort of thing. I want all of my projects to make a minimum gross profit percentage. That becomes our target. And most companies apply that year round. If 40% is their target, or 50% or 60%, they expect that year round, which kind of denies the seasonality of our business as well. So your total revenue minus some variation of direct costs. Here's another area where we kind of get convoluted and we mess ourselves up, is not everybody measures gross profit the same way. I'll give you an example. I had a client that I worked with when I came in. They weren't growing and they weren't making any money, which is why I was there, but they're also very proud of the fact that all of their jobs had 80% gross profit. And I said, how can that be? How can you have 80% gross profit on all of your events, but you're making like 2% net profit at the end of the day? And when we looked at it, we found out that the only thing that they were charging against their job cost, against their revenue and the cost of goods sold, was outside direct costs. For them, that was sub-rentals and some labor. Everything else was free. Everything else in the company was free. All staff was free. Project management was free. Drawings were free. Trucks were free. Anything they owned was free. All the equipment was free. And so, yeah, of course they were averaging 80% gross profit because they weren't charging anything to the job. So there is part of the problem. So in the rental business, I'm going to talk about 3 different types of business. In the rental business, you often see that direct cost is just the sub-rental. If all you do is rent equipment, that's a really awesome business to be in, because generally equipment doesn't talk back and doesn't take vacation. You rent it, people give you money, they bring it back to you, you rent it again. It's an awesome business. In a direct cost, in a rental business, the only real direct cost would be sub-rental and then some maintenance. Shipping and other things you might recover costs on. So yeah, having a target 80% gross profit on rental would make sense in a business like that. In an event business, if everything is free and the only direct cost is outside labor, then you're looking at 70% gross profit. And if you charge labor to a job, the labor that is actually on the job to the job, you might be targeting 60%. Again, these are ridiculously high gross profits in economic terms. And then event production, we tend to charge all direct costs, inside and outside labor, to those jobs. And now we start to see gross profit targets in the 40 to 50% range. But that usually means that the owned equipment is free to the job, because that's the only way you could really achieve those margins, is if you didn't have to pay for a majority of the gear. And this probably represents 90% of the companies that I see out in the marketplace right now. They follow one of these three patterns. Now, the scary thing is that you have some people who follow the rental pattern and they're a production company, or they follow the event pattern in their production company, in which case they're getting some very unrealistic looks at their profitability. Now, in this model, and again, this is very traditional, so if this sounds like you, don't be surprised. In this model, the idea of subrentals are bad. We don't want to bid on jobs where I don't have equipment availability. The first thing I do when I build a quote is I look inside the system to see if the gear is available, make substitutions, or I don't bid on the job. If I don't have the gear, then I'm going to have outside direct costs on that, subrentals, in which case that's bad, and we don't want that. Never mind all the profit you can make from the rest of the job. If you have to go subrent projectors, oh my goodness, the sky is falling. Same thing applies to outside labor. We want to hire out. We don't want to use outside labor because that's giving money to other people, but we want to hire them full-time as employees and pay them year-round, and somehow we think that's a better idea. But we justify it by saying they can work in the warehouse, which means we don't have to hire permanent help in the warehouse, which makes a whole lot of sense until you're busy and there's no one in the warehouse because everybody's out doing shows. And then in this model, all revenue tends to be good, right? So if I have no subrentals and I have no outside labor, then that revenue is always going to be good. And I will look at each job as its own little P&L, even to the point that I might start applying overhead to it, which is a huge indicator that we've just slipped off the edge of the cliff and we're in a strange accounting world that doesn't make any sense at all. Living in this world, following these models, which again are very traditional, you get these kinds of results. Number one, you're going to have very slow growth because you're stifling sales, or you're putting an artificial constraint on sales because you're going to run out of resources, which will increase the cost of the job, it'll lower the margins, and you'll quit selling. Your margins are going to continually shrink over time because in this slow growth scenario, every job becomes very important to you, which means you tend to sell on price, even though your costs are increasing every single year and your margins are going to increase. Another reason your margins increase is you're not necessarily making wise decisions about how many people to hire, how much staff to keep, you have too much or too little, how much equipment to own, you have too much or too little, because you're not making rational decisions based on the numbers. You start talking about competitors killing you with their pricing because people have other cost bases and they can charge less for things, or maybe their labor force is less, or maybe they're not as, they don't need as much profit to keep their doors open as you do. We end up selling a lot from fear. We need those windfall jobs. We like to get that, that big recurring annual job that we drop our margin on, but at least we know we have it every year. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but selling from fear, which means that we sell on price, is a bad thing. And if these things get into a cycle, we sell from fear, which lowers our margin, which makes the next job even more important. So we sell from even more fear, which lowers our margins even more. We get into what we call the death spiral. And the death spiral, your margins are shrinking, your cash flow is bad, and your profits are continually declining. And the amazing thing about this is that that will not kill your company. You will just live a long, slow death on the edge for years and years to come. I've looked at companies that have been doing this for 20 years, and making basically zero profit every year, and their employees get paid less and less. The owner makes less and less. They keep subsidizing their poor profit by not doing things that they need to do, like equipment maintenance, moving into an appropriately sized building or a building that's not falling down. It's a horrible, horrible situation to be in. So I hope that doesn't sound like anybody on the call right now, but if it is, reach out to me. It's time we had a conversation. The worst case of this is when somebody takes this formula and go, oh, we need the jobs to make more money, so we're going to add overhead to the job. Sometimes we call this burden. So we're going to automatically say, hey, if our overhead is 20%, then all jobs should make 20% plus gross profit. And this makes a lot of sense when you're busy. It kind of says, oh, well, if we're going to take on another job, will it cover our overhead, blah, 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 blah. But it doesn't make any sense when you're slow. Because imagine the slowest month of the year. If you have one job come through and you start burdening it with these margins and you can't win the job, you're missing the chance to take any gross profit into the business at all. And that's when things get really ugly. That's when you start skimming along the bottom and kind of living hand to mouth in your business. So burden or overhead allocations, anything like that. I know a lot of accountants will recommend that because they're trying to understand your business. But I will politely say they don't understand your business well enough, and the solution that they're applying is a solution that works in other industries, but not in ours. We're in a service industry. We're seasonal, and the idea of burden, even if you made it scalable burden or seasonal burden, doesn't really apply. Now, I'll get some nasty emails about that, but that's okay. I'll suffer the slings and arrows of that because I've proven time and time again in organizations that that concept is not helping them in any way at all. So we're trying to reconcile old school, which I've just described, with kind of the reality of business. Back in the day, the rentals were more profitable. They really were. Rental was a great, great business to be in. It was very attractive, but there were a lot of barriers to entry back then. 30 years ago, the cost of capital was extraordinary. Companies that started up in the, say in 1990, for instance, were financing their company on credit cards or credit lines that were costing 18 to 22%, which you don't see anywhere today, except in some very tough markets. So we don't have those barriers of entry today. You've got leasing companies that will give you a very favorable rate. You have manufacturers that will front you gear, put you on 120-day terms. You have a huge wholesale market that you can rent anything you need, which also tends to force prices down, by the way. So it's awfully handy. You don't have to own all the gear you used to have to own because you can source it from other places. So all of these are changing what's happening today. Where labor was a courtesy 30 years ago, now it's your biggest risk. Every time you put a human being, into a truck, out into a hotel ballroom, underneath a scaffolding or a bunch of truss floating in the air, you're taking huge amounts of risk. And not just to mention that people are, you're not going to lose a job because gear failed. You're going to lose a job because of your human reaction to gear failing. So people are a big risk. I remind people to think about, the average cost for a plumber in the US now is well over $100 an hour. And most of them will charge you a 2-hour minimum just to come diagnose your problem before they fix it. But somehow we're scared to charge more than, $45, $50, or even $60 an hour for a skilled technician. Now think about that. Who are we lying to? Do customers not know that skilled labor costs money? Blended gross profit varies widely across types of work. So an event is more profitable than a production, but it's smaller. So I need more events to make the same amount of gross profit. So these are some realities that we have to deal with. I'll pause here. I got a nice question. Can you please clarify the difference between an event and a production? A production is a full service production, means that we're going to do the audio, video, lighting, the drawings. We might do some scenic, which we might call creative, but is not necessarily creative. versus an event, which is equipment plus labor. So an event is a modified or an integrated rental. I'm going to deliver and set this up. I might stick an operator behind a Mackie mixer. That might be an event, and there are scales of events. But production means that you're responsible for the outcome of the show. The event means you're only responsible for the functionality of your equipment and your technician. I hope that helps. I think we all agree what a rental is. Gear goes out, gear comes back. Awesome. So, great. I've talked about the problem. We've talked about a few theories. We've had our first question. Please ask some more. Let's talk about the fix. Thinking about the differences in projects, we know that projects are a blend of products and services. I have rental equipment. I have brokered equipment. In other words, I'm reselling somebody else's equipment. I have labor. I have brokered labor. I have products I might sell or expendables I might sell. I have expenses, trucking, travel, per diem, all these things that are expenses. Each one of those products and services has an expected and recommended margin for that. And it's not always the margins that we're using. And margins are derived from cost. So in order to calculate margin, I have to know what my cost actually is, which is why some of the old school models fail, because we don't know what the cost of rental equipment is. So here's what this starts to look like. I've got 3 jobs. I got 3 ways of pricing the exact same job up on your screen right now. We've got the equipment line. We have a line for a discount. We have a labor line, an expense line. There's a total line. So I have 3 $16,000 jobs, and we got to the price differently in each of them. All right. And then underneath that, we have the cost of equipment, which is the same for all of these jobs, because again, these are the same jobs. My goal is for you to understand how to make your pricing scalable. And the first thing you need to do to make your pricing scalable is measure gross profit on a job cost basis from the correct revenue. We are not going to do accounting right now. So anybody who's an accountant go, well, no, gross profit is realized revenue, but no, we're going to measure gross profit from retail revenue. So in item A, the retail price is $16,000 because there are no discounts in there. In retail B, we raise the price of equipment, but we discount it by the same amount. But the retail price of the job is now $18,000 and not the $16,000 in revenue that we're actually going to get. In C, the retail price is $18,500. The cost on all 3 jobs is the same. The realized gross profit is the same, but the scalable gross profit is calculated from the retail cost. So the $9,100 we made in retail A goes against $16,000. The $9,100 we made against retail B goes to the $18,000 of retail price of the job. It's an $18,000 job that you only got $16,000 for. It still cost you $9,100. And then extrapolate that to C against the more expensive job, $18,500. Now, if we can just start looking at gross profit based on retail, we will soon realize that discount is a job cost. It goes against the cost of the job. So we're automatically introduced another cost, which means that our expected gross margin percentages are going to be much lower, particularly if you have a lot of significant discounts. So my gross profit, the example I always use is, we do a charity event where we give them the equipment for free. And then we just charge them for the labor, and our margins on labor are 33%, so the margin on the job is 33%. But in fact, the equipment that we gave them for free did actually have a cost to it. And so we're measuring our margin against a net of 100% discount. And so we're not actually seeing, well, that job was profitable. We made 33%. We're well within our specs, except you didn't. You had an equal amount of equipment on there, and your net margin was actually, in the teens or single digits. So understanding what we're measuring job cost gross profit against is very, very important to understand what we're talking about today. Now, once I have a better understanding of that, then I can start looking at what the actual cost. I didn't spend a lot of time talking about cost in this previous one. I said the cost for all of these jobs is the same. In this model on Set the Target, we're going to put a realistic cost of the retail equipment to the job. And the realistic cost is some portion of retail or calculated cost. So we have a job cost value of $5,000 of equipment on these same jobs. And version A, that's half the retail price, which is not discounted. And version B, it's 42% of the retail price, but we are discounting it. And in version C, it's half the retail price, but we're discounting it even more, but we've raised our labor value. So in A, our labor costs are 25% or 75%, so we're making 25% margin. Same in B. And C, we've raised our labor prices, but we're making 50% margin because our cost didn't change, but we're charging more. Now, based on what the retail value of these jobs are, notice how my gross profit percentages have dropped, and notice that they're not the same across all three jobs. As a matter of fact, the more wisely priced C, where I'm charging more for labor and I'm discounting the equipment to make up the difference, has a lower gross profit at 36% based on the retail price. It's actually the more valuable job because it will scale. More labor gets added, my gross profit will go up accordingly. If I add more labor to these other ones, I'm only adding 25% margin for every dollar. So for every dollar of labor I add, I'm only adding 25% profit, 25 cents profit. For every dollar of labor I add into C, okay, I'm adding $1 of profit. So there's a lot of more value in that model. So if you've got that understanding, if you can see that the cost against the sell value is one way of looking at it, and this is familiar because this looks like a P&L, I'm going to blow your head up. Most industries sell from cost. When you buy a manufactured product, the price you pay, the margin that manufacturer makes is calculated from cost. Matter of fact, everything you buy is calculated from cost. And the only exception to that are pure service businesses where they can, like creative, create an artificial value on it. But anybody that charges by the hour, their hourly rate is based on a cost that is known. What has kept the rental industry or the rental production industry from embracing this idea is that we don't think we know what our rental costs are. We don't know what the cost of the equipment is. And then if we start to think about it, we realize that our cost of equipment is not the same as our competitor who might have the exact same equipment. And so we struggle to get our head around this. And so we ignore it altogether and go back to one of the old models that we've always seen. So in the scenario that you're looking at now, I want you to note that the thing at the top of the line is the cost. We are not, the sell price is down there, the second line from the bottom. The way we get to the sell price is we take the cost of our elements, equipment, labor, and expense, and we add appropriate margins to them commensurate with the amount of risks that we incur from them. So our risk on labor is much higher than our risk on equipment, so I want to make a higher margin. Our risk on expenses is quite high because you don't always get to recover expenses, and the cost of documenting $1 of expense is probably 4 or 5 times more expensive than documenting $1 of equipment or $1 of labor, because there's so many elements to it. And as a matter of fact, 35% margin on expenses is really kind of low. So when we calculate, this is getting us to a blended margin. In A, B, and C, each have a different sell price because we're applying different margins but all jobs have the same cost. Now we could also cast this as 3 different jobs from 3 of the same job from different companies, where each company has a different cost basis, but they may also add a different margin to it and come out with a different price. So when your competitor puts a price in front of the client and you go, there's no way they can make money from doing that, you don't know that. You don't know what their cost basis is. You don't know what margins they're actually trying to make. You're making an assumption based on how you track numbers, which might be a methodology that was established 3 decades ago. Your head hurt yet? All right. So if we start selling from cost and we're getting a blended margin, depending on what our costs are, we'll determine what is an appropriate margin, overall blended margin to target. All right. But I'm hearing the buts, but. Where does the cost come from? So if we know that no two companies have the same cost except in commodity, let's think about this. What is a commodity? A commodity is something where the price of the object or the service or whatever it is dictated by the marketplace. Let's take a barrel of oil. A barrel of oil is the same price everywhere, pretty much around the world. The cost of getting it from point A to point B is not, but the cost of the barrel is actually the same. So companies that buy oil buy it at the same price. What it costs them to move it afterwards is a different thing, but the oil itself is a commodity. Most of you are not in the commodity business, though you often feel commoditized because you have customers who are price shoppers, or you're competing against a competitor who doesn't understand the price basis. Another mistake we make in cost is, using the I know a guy theory. What is the cost of this audio console? Well, we've owned it for a long time, but if I had to get another one, which is replacement cost, I know a guy who's got one, he'll rent it to me for $500 a week. Okay, that is not a realistic cost. That's the I know a guy cost, which we can't apply to any formula about job cost. So what we want to look at is, what can I reasonably get a replacement and reliably get a replacement for? And that's the number that we want to use. And then the third thing that we often do that messes all of this up is, many of you have systems where the first job gets the gear. And the methodology is, I go in, I write a quote, I immediately put it on hold so I can see inventory allocation. I can lock the inventory into my job, and then I can wait the next 6 months for the client to confirm. Tying up all that gear, making it hard for other people to quote on jobs because there's no gear available, which is crazy. Okay? When in fact, that job might benefit from not having to subrent gear because it booked it in advance and reserved it, forcing other jobs to buy gear. For the company, the replacement cost on that gear is the same regardless of which job it went to. So protecting job cost on a job is not the same thing as protecting job costs for the entire organization. So many operations now look at the jobs and try to more fairly or equitably allocate available inventory, and project managers negotiate, well, who's going to get this equipment and who's going to cross rent? Well, your job's only 1 day. I guess you should cross rent. My job's a week long. But that doesn't give us a good indication of what that job value was when we put the numbers together. And that's, at the end of the day, is probably the thing that's most valuable to us. Should I quote on this job? Here's the margin I think I can get. Do I want to lower the margin to win the job? Do I need to raise the margin because we're busy? What's a fair price to charge given our situation? And so the methodology that I use, that many of you are familiar with, is called job cost analysis. So job cost analysis is the selling from cost, the third example that I showed you, where we establish the cost first, we add margin to it, just like you would do in a sale. If you do an installation, your integration department sells this way. They look at the cost of the equipment, the cost of labor, the cost of supplies, expendables, screws, wire, and then they add margin on top of that. And if you add 20% margin, you get 20% gross profit. If you add 20% markup, you only get 16.67% gross profit. So a smart company never does markup, they always add margin, which gets them to a number that will match what their gross profit will actually be. So in job cost analysis, the definition is JCA is seasonal and strategic pricing based on replacement cost, in which opportunistic profit goes to the company, not the job. Opportunistic profit is we estimated our replacement cost on labor to be, let's call it 50% of our sell price. And I happened to stumble across some labor that only cost me 30% of sell price. That extra profit doesn't go to the job, that extra profit goes to the company, right? We call it the house's money. If we're able to use house's equipment and not sub-rent, okay, the house makes more money, not the job. If one job has to sub-rent and another job doesn't, but the company owns that equipment, both jobs pay the same price for the gear, regardless of where the sub-rental had to go. Now, in JCA, discounts are still a job cost, like I showed you in the second example, but resource scarcity is not a job burden because it's captured in replacement cost. So if I charge you, if the rental for your AV Stumble screen is, $500 a week, and your cost for that is $250 a week, and I have to sub-rent one, hopefully that $250 is to cover my sub-rental, but it doesn't matter to the job. The job's going to pay $250 a week for that screen, whether you sub-rent it or not. So applying job cost analysis can be a little tricky. One, we have some difficult concepts to get our head around that we just talked about, but we're solving an age-old problem, and it's a very simple solution. And if you're having trouble understanding it or getting it, that means you've probably been in the industry a long time like I have. And it took me 25 years of being in the industry before I figured out how to do this and do it consistently and apply it equitably across the board to get consistent results. So if you want to be able to consistently know the value of the jobs that you're quoting before you quote them and what value they will deliver to the company, and judge all jobs equally in the same time period, then JCA, job cost analysis, is the methodology for doing it. And that means that you have to learn how to sell from cost. So here's how we get started. I know you're going to have some questions. Feel free to start typing them up because we're going to get there in just a minute. The first thing we have to do to get started is raise our labor prices. I don't even know what your labor prices are. I just know they're too low. I can make that blanket statement because 100% of the companies that I've worked with have labor prices that are too low. We start by reviewing the cost to make sure that our labor prices are in line and that our margins are reasonable for labor. Never mind what other people charge. We're going to sell from cost. Okay? Now, you can improve your cost by being a better buyer on labor, making sure that you're selling labor commensurate with the skill level. In other words, don't sell a high-end audio engineer for the same price that you sell an audio operator or an AV tech, right? You need to charge even more for the higher end jobs because your cost is higher. We need to establish a rental cost. Most of you don't have rental cost, even though your rental management software has a place that you can put in a rental cost, either as a percentage, which is better than nothing, or as an actual fixed price, which is more ideal. So you can review your rental pricing and put in a rental cost. And if you still want to sell from retail in a discount, that's fine. There's a norm about that. You have a certain number of customers that are used to seeing a retail price less a discount, but most of them wouldn't know or care if you took that convoluted pricing method away from them and just told them what you're going to charge them. Right? So once we establish rental costs, we tend to have to raise our retail cost on the equipment, but we're also going to increase the range of discounts that we're willing to give. In order for JCA to work effectively, you need to probably have 3 to 4 tiers of pricing that match your buyer channels. You also have to have seasonal pricing with 3 to 4 tiers, depending on the time of the year it is. So a retail buyer in busy season is going to pay the highest price always. Okay? A key buyer, which is somebody who buys a lot from you, will pay the lower price. Somebody who resells your services to somebody else, in other words, a middleman, will pay a lower price so that they have room to resell. And then wholesale, which is mostly your sub-rental partners, your B2B partners, and you're a buyer and a seller, will pay the least price. If your busy month is May, everybody's going to pay the highest version of their tier. If your slow month is July, everybody's going to pay the lowest margin in that tier. So the same job will be less expensive to sell or for your customer to buy in July than it would in, say, for instance, May. So we want to make sure that our target margins vary according to busy and slow seasons. And there'll be some questions about this because I'm sure you're wondering how you can present that to your customers in a way that's not going to get you pushback. But let's talk about that. So I've got one question here. I'm going to answer a question, then I'm going to talk about a few other things for you, and then we'll come back to some more questions. So get your questions together. Now's the time to do it. The question on the table at the moment is, should we make it clear we're talking to the client that the pricing is based on what season they booked in? Yeah, absolutely, you can. I mean, what would be great for customers to understand is say, oh, thank goodness your event's in July. That's typically a slower time, though we're having a pretty good July, but I'm glad you're going to be with us. And so there's some savings on that. Okay? So we can help people find their way around our pricing model. Now, your customers are more sophisticated about this than you think, because if they buy from you, they also buy travel. And they know that travel varies by the hour, and if not just the day in the week. So seasonal pricing is normal for most of us. You know, fruit in the winter costs more than fruit in the summer. I mean, this, again, we're all consumers. We understand this. But yeah, I would definitely use that as an advantage, saying, hey, we're very competitive that time of year. You're going to get my best price that time of year. Okay? But the fact of the matter is they're going to get your best price any time of year because you know what your costs are. You know how to make money, and you can price competitively for you any time of year at your 3 to 4 different tiers. So great question. So we're going to have some time for some more questions. We're doing pretty good on time here. I just want to talk about a couple of things. While you're thinking up your questions and typing them in, please use the Q&A box. Jumpstart workshops. If an hour dose of me every month isn't enough, come get a concentrated dose of me for 2.5 days in Dallas. May 4th through 6th, we're going to do strategy and marketing together. These two topics are tied at the hip. I don't know why I didn't put them together sooner, but we're definitely going to put them together. We're working on this right now. We've booked our hotel. We're at the Nilo in Las Colinas, which is a real groovy space, really close to the DFW airport. I'm developing content. We have 11 or 12 presentations that we're going to put together for you that will take you through all the aspects of this. A lot of exciting stuff going on to get ready for this event, and I hope you'll be part of it. We are, you know, every couple of years I retool things, so our Jumpstart events, we're actually making them a little bit smaller this year, which will be great, make them a little bit more intimate. We had 120 people in the ballroom last year for Jumpstart operations, and I think we all agreed that was too many people. We want to have more opportunities for conversations, make everybody who's on stage more accessible to the audience. We're looking out for you. We want you to have an event that you can get a lot out of. And then mark your calendars for sales and operations. As the website will tell you, those dates are tentative. We're in the final stages of securing our hotel dates for those, but those are our target dates, and we're in one of the largest hotel markets in North America. We have our choice of hotels in August, so I'm pretty confident about those dates, but they are not an absolute guarantee yet. But get your sales team and your ops teams, let them know we want to see them in August. For most of you, that's a great time of the year to let some of these folks go out and learn, not just from me, but from our partners, from our guest presenters, and then all of you, all of the peers in this. And then management will be back in November. So mark your calendar for that. Watch your email. In just a few weeks, we'll open up the registration for strategy and marketing. So, yeah, opens March 16th. So right there, hey, I made a slide for that. Our webinar for next month will be Business Strategy 101. We're going to start getting you ready for the strategy workshop so you don't come in cold. This is something that a lot of people neglect because it's too complicated, it's hard to understand, you have to bring in somebody from the outside. No, I'm going to take you through the one-on-one version of this and show you how you can get a grasp of your strategy sooner than later. If you're ready for some help, you'll want to see if you and I might be a good fit, please schedule an introductory call. I would love to talk to you, help understand your business, help you understand what I do for companies, and see if there's a way we might work together. Schedule your free 20-minute call, and we'll take it from there. I look forward to talking to you. Those are fun calls. We're doing a lot of them this year, which is probably a testament to my marketing, or just the fact that I've been around for a long time. But it's been great chatting with so many folks. So let me get a couple of questions here. Next question. Let me click the old one off. The question is, don't we take the risk to sometimes be too expensive with seasonal pricing? Not everyone works that way. So, yes, there is that risk. You should always be taking the risk of being too expensive, because if you're not taking the risk of being too expensive, you're leaving money on the table, right? This is a supply and demand thing. So if every job that you bid on is critical for you, if you're always in a must-win situation, job cost analysis helps you find the number that you can live with and make money that will help you win the job. What you don't want to do is win a job because you cut your price and you cut your price to below your cost, and you actually lose money by doing a job. I've certainly worked with companies where their biggest client, once we looked at the numbers, they actually lose money on or just break even on, which is the same as losing money. So yes, you do run the risk of being too expensive with seasonal pricing compared to somebody else, because again, your costs and their costs are not the same. But if you try and match your competitors' pricing, okay, well, one, you're competing against the wrong person. You're not selling yourself to the customer. But two, they may need that job. They may be more desperate than you are, if you can imagine that. So this will help you, and then we can come to strategy and marketing, because we need to work on the size of your sales funnel, because you need more business so that you're more comfortable taking risks with pricing. Risk is where all the margin is. So getting your head around this is probably the last bastion of profit that you have control over. We all know how to cut costs. Here's how you sell profitably. So thank you. That's a great question. Can you recommend a good strategy for documenting replacement costs? Yeah, I'll give you a simple strategy for equipment. Replacement cost of equipment is what it costs for you to get it on the wholesale market. So it doesn't take very many samples to figure that out. 80% of your inventory you have sub-rented at some time or another. So you can find that pricing without too much trouble. The folks at the wholesalers have got used to me getting my clients to call them and have them give them a whole book of pricing that they can rely on. Now, those companies also have variable pricing according to the time of the year. So just because your wholesaler says, hey, here's the price, we charge you for that, but always check with us because we might have a better deal. You go with the first price they gave you when you're calculating your cost. If you can get a better deal because you negotiated at the time of the rental, again, that's the house's money, not the job's money. We know we can get the gear at least for the price they quoted us, because the wholesalers all know what each other charges. And if you can't get it from one, you'll be able to get it from another. So that will get you the replacement. Same thing on labor. Your replacement cost on labor is what it costs you to hire somebody from the outside of appropriate quality. Emphasis on that, appropriate quality. I know a guy, he only works a couple days a month, but he's really cheap. That's not a replacement cost. Next question. With a discount tier system, discount per market segment, wholesale, retail, blah, 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 do you sell as a presented line item discount, or do you simply give them a lower equipment price? All right, so for those various segments, if I go back to the those pricing tiers, okay, on retail, I never need to show a retail customer a line item equipment price or discount. I need to tell them what the job is worth and I can give them a discount even though it doesn't look, even though I didn't give them one in terms of math. Hey, the job's 50,000. You know, you would have charged them 45. You tell them it's 50, and you give them a $5,000 discount. There's no reason that a retail customer needs the level of detail. They're retail. They don't understand what all the lines mean anyway. Wholesale, I might give a line item discount to wholesale. I might say, hey, I can discount these breakout room items, but I can't discount the projectors. I just give you your regular discount, but I can give you an extra discount on this extra stuff. Most wholesale agreements between businesses, and that's like you guys here on this phone call webinar doing business with each other, will have a price where you agree that you're going to charge each other, 40% off retail or something like that. In which case, you can either take the price that you agreed on or say, no, I can't let the gear go, or it's not available. So I hope that answers your question. Got a question about the workshops. Are we doing the voucher thing again? No, we're not doing vouchers again. My consulting clients know that they get a better deal on workshop pricing, but we are going to have some aggressive early bird pricing as always. And if you're going to register more than 5 people, and you know who you are, give us a call. We'll give you a break on more than 5 people. Next question. How often would you review and adjust rental costs? Is annual review adequate, or are there signs to look for to trigger one? Oh, fantastic question. When I was in this role, I reviewed rental costs pretty much continuously. My sub-rental person would let me know if he was having trouble finding the product at what we thought the cost should be. If he saw changes in the marketplace or scarcity, he would let me know, and we would make on-the-fly adjustments. But typically, when I got to the end of the year, which for me was December, this is one of the things I would do annually, is I would go through everything. And sometimes I would raise the cost or the perception of cost to raise the retail price, because we sold from retail back then. But I would raise the retail price based on an anticipated increase or elasticity. In fact, that here's a number, here's a product that the customers don't seem to have any opinion of what its value is. They just take it for granted, which means I can raise the price. Labor is something that I raise prices on absolutely every year. Never had pushback. The amount of pushback you get on labor pricing is not even worth discussing. It's generally a single level objection. And anybody that pushes back on labor price is probably the worst kind of price shopper if they do more than just question it. So there's a single level objection saying, whoa, that's more than it used to be. That's just a single level objection. You just say, yeah, it is. Labor goes up every year. Everybody gets that and understands that, and they usually move on. There are people who have more specific objections about that, and if they start throwing things around, well, so-and-so does their labor for X, your response to that is also, yes, I know. And typically, I would say 90% of the time, that's all the objection you're going to get. Anybody who objects more than that is a true price shopper, and how many of you are looking for more price shoppers? Thank goodness they identified themselves. You'll make more money if they go away, probably. Or you can give them a discount somewhere else. Notice in example C, we moved some of the cost from when we raised labor pricing, we increased our discount. And often you just point that out to them. Say, hey, remember you used to only get a 25% discount. Now I'm giving you 30. Okay. Let's see how we're doing on time. Okay, another question here. What sort of range of shaded margin would you suggest? Say if retail's plus or minus 5%, key buyer plus 20%, at a seasonal range. All right. Let me reframe the question I think you're asking. What's the range of seasonal margin that you would suggest across the 4 buying groups, if you have 4 buying groups? And that really comes down to what's the overall margins that you're used to making. So the closer you are to a commodity sale, the narrower the margin range. the closer you are to a value proposition sale, you have much broader sweeps in what your potential margin is. Let me give you an example. If you're in a highly competitive marketplace and you've got 3 other companies that you guys always bid against each other, there's always 4 bidders, clients know that, your range of pricing is going to be a little bit narrower. So when you're all busy, you might be 5 or 10 points apart. That might be your range. And when you're slow, it's whoever's clever enough to put a competitive price out there. And so that seasonality, if you go back to your P&L and say, hey, based on our overhead, if we do $5 million of revenue and our overhead is going to be 3.5 million, then I've got or 1.5 million, then I got to keep my cost of goods sold to 40%. And over the course of a year, well, my cost of goods sold in a slow month is going to be high, but in a busy month it's going to be lower because my pricing is higher. Something that you should consider when you're doing all of this and you're doing an annual budget, which would be a whole nother webinar, is look at the amount of demand that you normally have during a period and setting the margins, the expected margins at the budgeting time. And then as the year progresses, see how well you're living up to them and adjusting that for the upcoming season. I tweak budgets all year long as well. I don't sort of budget in October for the next year and just wait and see what happens. So I hope that answers some of your questions. All right, so we are out of time. You guys have been fantastic. Thank you for all the questions. Let's see, one more slip up. The reframe was correct. Thank you. I'm glad I understood what you were asking. So thank you guys for being here. I've got, I'll give you my final thoughts. I think I have one more slide I wanted to share with you. Here we go. So takeaway from all this, remember that normalizing your project costs and margins is a process that affects your entire business. It affects sales, it affects operations, finance, capital spending, marketing, staffing, training. Everything is affected by this. And when you start making changes in how you cost things, which changes how you make money, everything's going to be affected. You will scrutinize more aspects of your business when you do this. So the ramifications are extremely long-reaching if you let the process work its way through. And over time, you'll get the hang of it. If you want to move faster, then let's talk. Let's talk about that. My value is, and I help you accelerate the process of change, keep you from making the mistakes that you would get if you try to figure out how to do it on your own. And if that's what you're ready for, then it's certainly time for us to talk, so reach out to me. So again, recording, email tomorrow, share this with your friends, watch it over. If you got more questions, don't hesitate to shoot me an email. I love to answer them. Thank you everybody for attending, and hey, go make some money.